The purpose of my channel, and I mentioned this in the about section, is to just share truth as it's been shown to me. And this channel is not for everyone. This is for people who are committed to the truth and who are willing to receive it. And there's some difficult things that I talk about here, and you can see just from my channel numbers, it's never going to be a popular channel, I don't think. The format, it's a very information dense, and if you don't like listening to me talk, people aren't going to want to work through a video that's an hour in length or what have you. We talk about things that just the mainstream is not willing to conceive of or accept. And I'm going to be honest with you, over the last about 6 years, my framework for reality has been sort of shattered and remade numerous times. And each time that happens, I realize more and more that we are in this spiritual warfare, and that there's things going on around us all the time that we just don't understand. All of us are raised and kind of conditioned, really, to have a materialistic worldview of the world around us. In my case, when I was growing up, I used to love to read. And so the things that I would read would be mysteries. I've read literally hundreds, if not thousands, of books by Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, the Bobbsey twins, and so forth. And I also liked science fiction. I've just read a ton of classic literature. I've read Jules Verne, a majority of what he wrote. I don't know that I've read all his stuff, but I've read a majority of what he wrote. H.G. Wells, I've read a lot of the stuff that he wrote, and others. And see, these guys, the people writing this stuff, they're pushing a materialistic worldview. And what do I mean by that? So with H.G. Wells, or these mystery writers, there's always a naturalistic, rational explanation for the phenomena that these people are encountering. So it's like the Hardy Boys. There might be a house that seems to be haunted, but the explanation for what's going on there is that someone's camped out in the house and they're looking for something, a treasure hidden in the house or a secret room hidden in the house. And so they're staging these hauntings to make it look like the place is haunted and to drive people away. And then the Hardy Boys come in and they figure it all out, and oh look, there's this natural, perfectly logical explanation for all this. The reality is, though, there's a supernatural component to our existence, and not everything has a naturalistic explanation. And if we don't realize that and come to grips with the reality of the spiritual warfare going on around us, we're going to become casualties, because we're not going to be prepared to face up against the spiritual and supernatural threats that we're going to face in our lives. So this topic of cryptids, specifically werewolves, for me started when I had a conversation, and you can see the video the videos that I've done on this already that have related to it. One being the video "Evil Beasts of the End Times: Werewolves Are Real." And what started me down this path of investigation was I had a coworker, and she told me her experience of an encounter that she and her husband had with a pack of dogmen, of werewolves. And so when I first heard that, so I'm here in East Tennessee. I moved down here 3 years ago. This is Sasquatch country. I've always believed that Sasquatch was an animal, some kind of great ape possibly, that just is extremely rare, maybe electrosensitive, and so it just avoids people more than anything, and avoids city areas and stuff, and so it's just rare and people don't encounter it real often. That was kind of my baseline of where I was at, because I had I wouldn't call myself like a I don't know what they call themselves. I'm not a squatch head or whatever they call themselves. I'm not all obsessed with the subject, but I had heard some things here and there, and I knew a little bit about it, enough to be well informed, enough to know that these things are dangerous, that they'll eat children and things like that. And that was kind of my baseline of knowledge at that point. And then, so my coworker telling me this, I fully believed that she was telling me the truth and that she had had an unusual experience. But I'd never heard of a dogman or a werewolf being real before. And so my thought was maybe she saw something that didn't quite understand what she saw or didn't see it clearly. But it did put a little, a little point of interest in my mind, something that I intended to come back to and look at in more detail. And so at this point, I've looked at it in more detail. And guess what? There are literally dozens of credible accounts that I've come across. And the North American Dogman Project has compiled something like 300 different encounters. People are encountering these things all across the country, and there's certain areas that are more of a hot spot than others. Yes, people are encountering Dogman, and there's a consistency in the details of these accounts, and these accounts are highly credible. And in that video, Evil Beasts of the End Times, Werewolves Are Real, I believe I gave you several first-hand accounts that I consider to be highly credible. And I'm going to give you another one right now in case you didn't watch that video and in case you have no background in this whatsoever. So this channel, The Confessionals, I would highly recommend it. I can't speak, so basically the guy who is the host of this channel, he's a born-again Christian from what I can tell and a truther. I don't know exactly what denominational background this fellow's from. But he mentioned that in the Christian churches he felt very ostracized because he was a truth seeker and people would just make fun of him for that. And I've been in the same place most of my life, and it is frustrating. It is very lonely when you're a truth seeker and just no one else around you is aware. It's frustrating. And so he kind of decided to do this and do these interviews and stuff as a launch point to put information out there for people who are awake and who are ready to receive things that are beyond the normal human experience. Anyway, this is one of the guests that he brought on here. This fellow is a sheriff's deputy who had an encounter in this area called the LBL, the Land Between the Lakes. It's a I've talked about it a little bit in my other video. It's basically, I believe it is a game preserve that the government created for cryptids, for werewolves, and for Sasquatch. It's the Land Between the Lakes. It straddles the border of Kentucky and Tennessee. It's not very far from where I live now. And this fellow had an encounter. He and his partner, his work partner and a friend of his, another sheriff's deputy, they were turkey hunting in the LBL, and they just had a horrific experience. And I consider him to be a highly credible witness. And you guys should, if you've never heard of this stuff before, you should watch this interview. Carefully consider it. And I'll come back to this in a moment. There are some other videos that I find to be highly credible as well, and I'll reveal the reasons why I think that, and show you that. Well, it's really one other video, but the fellow involved has done. He's put a lot of different interviews out there, stuff to think about. But I'll come back to that in a moment. This is a good intro point. And in his encounter, he is actually encountering both dogmen and Sasquatch in the same encounter, and these things interact with each other. And really, his final conclusion, I believe, and my final conclusion after looking at this stuff in detail, is they're the same types of creature, the same types of entity, and we'll discuss exactly what that means as we go forward in this video. I'm just going to say, if you can't, sometimes our response when we encounter things that are uncomfortable is we just immediately turn it off, or we get angry because we don't want to believe these things to be true. And I certainly didn't want to believe a lot of this stuff to be true. And a lot of this stuff does fly in the face of what I know scientifically or rationally or materialistically to be true. And so I don't like this stuff. I don't believe this stuff because I want to believe it. It is not comfortable to think that there are these entities out there on the fringes of civilization, and in the modern era they're actually coming into our territory. People are encountering them more and more, and I think that that is a trend that's going to increase in upcoming days for a number of reasons. And I just really feel like it's my duty to talk about this stuff. So I've talked about this with my parents, and they are they're of a mind, the similar mind to where I am on this stuff. I've talked to other family members, and some of them think I'm insane, of course, and others are just ignoring me and not talking about it. Of course, I'm not surprised by that at all. And I expect that's where they will stay unless they have something that shakes them out of their current worldview paradigm, and that's just how it is. But I still feel like I have a responsibility to talk about this stuff and to share this stuff. And I'm going to do it from a scriptural basis because Scripture is, it is our authority. It is revelation from God. It is true. And so today we're going to be talking about Nephilim descendants and their capabilities. And my views on this have shifted quite a lot. There was a while where I just thought these things were natural creatures that maybe were undiscovered by science. But then I was just coming across commonalities in all of the first-hand accounts that these things have capabilities that go beyond the mere physical. And that didn't make any sense to me at all. I'm not a superstitious person. I want to understand why things are the way they are. And of course, as always, when we turn to the scriptures, we find the answers for what's going on. And everything just clicks and fits within the scriptural framework. So to give you a little bit of background, I've talked about this before in other videos. This is Genesis 6 where we see the Nephilim. And basically, the Bible says here that, brief overview, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them. So normal humanity is already having offspring, having children. That's the context of this. That the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and took them wives of all which they chose. These sons of God, this is not referring to human beings, because that's already been happening. Men and women are having babies. The sons of God taking the daughters of men is something else entirely. The Bible talks about this in numerous places. I'm not going to touch on this in great. I'm not going to talk about this in great detail because I've done other videos about it. My video, categories of beings, I talk about this a little bit, and in that video you'll see that there were still some things I was hesitant to believe or get on board with, but I've come across more resources and first-hand accounts since I did that video, and so my view has shifted a little bit on some of this stuff, and that's what we're going to talk about here. But who are these sons of God? Well, these are spiritual beings, fallen angels, we could call them, although I talk about why the term angel is a bit problematic in that other video, categories of beings. But these are fallen angels, and they have intermingled with the daughters of men. Now think about this logically with me, okay? So you have a man, you have a woman, up here, as that's described. You have a man and you have a woman, and they have a baby. That baby is going to have characteristics and qualities of mom and characteristics and qualities of dad. That's a normal thing that we all accept and understand to be true, okay? So logically, let's go one step further. If you have a human woman, a daughter of men, and you have a fallen angel, and they are producing offspring, those offspring are going to have capabilities and qualities of mom, the human, and capabilities and qualities of the dad, fallen angel. So now we've got to ask the question, well, what sorts of capabilities do these entities have? Because these Nephilim, these offspring, and the Nephilim descendants, so understand that with the Nephilim, some of these bloodlines have been passed down. I am currently of the mind that the bloodlines were probably wiped out during the flood of Noah. And, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about these capabilities, firstly. This is really important. And we're going to use the scripture to show us what are the capabilities of spiritual beings. And these will be some of the capabilities that these entities may have. So firstly, domination of the mind, possession, and mind speak. All throughout the New Testament, we're seeing accounts of demon possession and oppression in the lives of people. What happens is that if a person lets down their guard against spiritual entities, their mind can actually be entered and dominated by demons, fallen angels, demons. And so these are some characteristics, some capabilities that these Nephilim and Nephilim descendants may have. Domination of the mind, the ability to project fear into people's minds, for example, would be one example of domination of the mind. Outright possession, the ability to control people's minds. And there are many first-hand accounts where something called mind speak is encountered by people when they run into dogmen, werewolves. Mind speak, which is where they're hearing a voice projecting thoughts into their head. So one example of this is there's a woman driving along a lonely wooded highway in Maine, remote area. It's at night. She's by herself. A dog man comes out into the road in front of her. Her car dies, and it looks right at her, and she hears a voice in her head saying, "I'm going to come over to you. I'm going to drag you out of the car, and I'm going to rip your throat out." And she's in terror. She's encountering something that there's no frame of reference for. She's shaking. She's crying. She's just hysterical. But she is a believer, and she starts praying and just asking Jesus to deliver her. And so this thing comes over to the side of her door. It bends down and looks in at her, and then it stops, and she hears that same voice in her mind saying something to the effect of, "I didn't realize that you were a believer," or "I didn't realize that you were a Christian," and then it just goes off and leaves her. So that's an example of mind speak. And other people report this as well, that when they have encounters with these things, they'll hear a voice in their head, and it's almost always incredibly hostile, with absolute cruel intention, just dripping with violence and intimidation. And that's this first characteristic. So another characteristic that we see is physical strength. Let's go to Acts 19:15. Acts 19:15. Okay, and there were 7 sons of one Sceva, a Jew, and chief of the priests, which did so. So basically, these guys are seeing that these exorcists are going around in the name of Jesus and casting out demons. And so these 7 sons of one Sceva, a Jew, chief of the priests, they're not true believers. But they're seeing other people do this, and they're thinking, hey, well, we're part of the priesthood, we're sons of this priest, we have this lineage, we can do this too. And so they go out and they find someone that's possessed, and they try to cast out this demon, and the evil spirit answered and said, "Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you?" And the man in whom the evil spirit was leaped on them and overcame them and prevailed against them, so that they fled out of that house naked and wounded. So this thing just goes out of control on them and beats them up, tears their clothes off, and 7-on-1. Alright, so this is clearly something supernatural going on here. So extreme physical strength is one attribute of angelic beings. Well, demons in this case, but angelic beings. They were angelic, or they were spiritual beings before they rebelled against God and got that classification of demon. A demon is just a spiritual being who has rebelled against God and now serves and is part of the evil powers. Alright, infrasound. And so just to be clear, physical strength is absolutely something that people who encounter wolf shifters like dogmen, werewolves, and I will keep using both terms because I do think that there's a distinction there between dogmen and werewolves. We'll talk about this a little more. There is a scientific and military side to this, where the physical beings are being bred, possibly, and used by the military. And I don't know that those are the same types of creatures as the true Nephilim descendant werewolves. Werewolf just means man-wolf, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail. But the physical strength is absolutely something that people, I should have, there's a video that I should have shown you. Maybe I'll post it later in a separate, maybe I'll do a compilation of videos that I find to be extremely convincing. But there's a video of a family who's been plagued by a creature. And so there's a video of the husband, I guess, or one of the guys in the family going out on the back deck, and there's just all these tall trees behind the house, and he's got a flashlight, he's got his phone, he's recording, he's shining the light up in the trees, and something huge is moving the wall of trees. It's like something from Jurassic Park before one of the big predators comes out of the forest canopy, you know. The trees are just moving, thrashing around. It's incredible. But he can't see anything. There's clearly something there, but he's not catching it on camera at all, and that speaks to this capability, which we'll talk about in a moment. But then this thing is making all these weird cries, and it's apparently just enraged that he's there, and it starts tearing entire limbs, I mean huge limbs, big limbs off these trees and just throwing them to the ground. There's other encounters, for example, this encounter, where he says at one point, one of these things picks up a rock that's probably 30 pounds and throws it, and it just comes whizzing past them and thuds into the ground, and they feel the impact of that thing. These things are incredibly strong, very dangerous. And this is one thing they do when they're angry. They'll tear up trees and just destroy the environment around them. They'll throw stuff, including very large things, at people. They can easily dismember animals and people, easily. And I mean just rip them to pieces. And there are accounts of that as well. Not necessarily first-hand accounts. Some of this stuff is being actively covered up, and it's hard to know exactly what's going on. But there have been a lot of people killed by these things, by the way, and on an increasing basis, and that is part of Revelation 6, where we see that a quarter of humanity is going to die in the lead up to the tribulation. They're going to be killed off by warfare, bioweapons, plagues, diseases, and beasts of the earth. Go read Revelation 6 for yourself. And that is important, because normally speaking, animal-related deaths are fairly small cause of death, or have been in the past. So when the Bible says that people being killed by beasts of the earth is going to become a thing in the end times, and a quarter of the population is going to die from all these different death causes, beasts of the earth killing people is going to become a very commonplace thing. It's going to get to the point where they can't cover it up anymore. I just want you guys to be prepared for this. And you can see that now some of you, as you're watching this, you're thinking, oh, John, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, that's fine. But you can at least, I hope, see that if I'm correct about this stuff, the world we are going into, the way things are changing, it's going to be weird. It's going to be terrible. There's going to be some dark things happening. So physical strength. Now let's talk infrasound. Isaiah 6. Infrasound. So in a lot of these accounts of people coming across Bigfoot or various wolf shifters, or dogmen, werewolves, and so forth, infrasound is a part of it, where these things are hitting people with basically like a howl or a growl, but there's an infrasound aspect to it where there's a vibration, and people say that they can feel their spine vibrating, or they can feel their organs vibrating. And this is a form of attack that actually can paralyze people, cause them to feel physically sick, causing them to almost pass out, be dizzy, unable to move, unable to think, unable to move quickly. They'll start vomiting and so forth. And it's not uncommon either for people to just completely lose control of their bowels when they have an encounter. That may be related to the infrasound as well, or it could be related to the abject terror that many people are experiencing when they see these things, because these things are just completely outside of their frame of reference. Anyway, Isaiah 6. So this is the vision that Isaiah has. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. Amen. And the whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. So that's the infrasound aspect of this. Their voices are shaking the house. The posts of the door are moving, and the house is filled with smoke. I don't know exactly what this means, but it's almost like the surfaces are vibrating and it's kicking up dust. or maybe even breaking up some of the physical structures that are there and like causing particles to come off of it. Infrasound, one of the capabilities of spiritual beings. Now let's talk shapeshifting. So in the Garden of Eden, Satan came to Eve in the form of a serpent. Okay? Let's look at 2 Corinthians 11:14. 2 Corinthians 11:14. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. And this is a warning that infesting and infiltrating the Christian churches are these evil false apostles, deceitful workers, who are really just there to lead people astray. And this is why as Christians we need to exercise our God-given discernment. But specifically it says Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. He can present as an angel of light. Another aspect to this, so angel specifically is a class of spiritual being that is a messenger. That's what angel means. It means messenger. And so angels, when we see them in the Bible, like Gabriel or some of the angels in the Old Testament, they have a human form to them. Now they still are clearly not human, because sometimes people are terrified when they see them. Sometimes people drop to their knees and want to worship these entities, and the angels that serve God will not accept worship. They will always say, no, don't worship me, I'm just a fellow servant. If you have an angel that is accepting worship, it's either a demonic entity, or in some cases in the scriptures you're actually looking at what's called a theophany, which is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ himself does show up in the Old Testament. Daniel's a good example of this, where Daniel's being given end times revelation from this being that has a form of a man, but it's clearly not a man. He has these burning eyes that are shining. His skin looks like burnished metal. He's wearing white linen. He's got this golden girdle on, and he's walking on water. This is Jesus. This is the same. This is the glorified Christ that we see in Revelation. The description's the same. But my question then is, these angels who appear to have a man-like form, and I believe that is so that they just don't terrify us. They're given a human form because they're messengers to humanity. So there's a little bit of commonality there to make them more efficient messengers. Do they always have a human form? Or when they are in the spiritual realm, do they have a different form and they're transforming into a human form? That is something that is a distinct possibility. And if that's what's going on, then the angels have the ability to transform as well. Shape-shifting. Let's look at Exodus 7:11. Here's another account. So firstly, one thing you got to understand is that magic is very real. And the reason magic is real is because the power behind it is real. Lying miracles. The devil and his ilk, they can perform lying miracles. Now a true miracle is something that God does using his own power for his own purposes. A lying miracle is an imitation miracle that's used using Satan's power, or the power of demonic entities. And that's what we see here in Exodus 7 verse 11. So let's go back to verse 10. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh. So this is during the captivity in Egypt. And they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. So this was the sign that God had given to Moses as one way to demonstrate his authority. But verse 11, then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also did in like manner with their enchantments. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents, but Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. So they do the same miracle. Now there is still a clear demonstration here, Aaron's rods swallowing up their rods, that God is the dominant power, okay? But they were still able to perform that miracle. And how is that happening? Well, I think, based on what I know now, what was going on there, these demonic entities have the ability to manipulate matter to a degree. And so that's what they're doing with these rods. They're taking these rods and transforming them into the form of a serpent. And then I think that those serpent bodies that have been created by demonic power, I believe that they are then being indwelt by evil spirits that bring a form of life to them, that animate them. I think that's what's happening there. I could be wrong about that. That's an inference on my part that it's kind of hard to substantiate, because we're dealing with something that is beyond empirical science. But the reality is, we see pretty clearly that spiritual beings have the capability of shape-shifting. And this is something I really did not want to accept as I was investigating this stuff. I was investigating Sasquatch and dogmen from the perspective of these are just animals. And therefore, if they're just animals, they cannot have any supernatural capabilities. But I believe that I was mistaken on that. I do now fully believe that shapeshifters are a real thing, because folklore revolving around werewolves goes back hundreds of years, and the shapeshifting element of it has pretty much always been there. Now, whether when they grab people and accuse them of being a werewolf, whether their accusations were correct or not, I don't really know. And then there were people who actually confessed and claimed that yes, they were werewolves. There's a lot of mental illness out there too, so it's hard to say exactly what's going on in all these cases, but I do believe that shape-shifting is a real thing. And there, one of these fellows that I'll show you an interview with, his thought on this is that when we have Nebuchadnezzar becoming a wild beast and going out and eating the grass of the field and so forth as a punishment, that there may have been an element here where he was dabbling with magic and with things that he shouldn't dabble with, and as a result of that, he was transformed into a beast form and then couldn't revert. And apparently this happens with people sometimes. But anyway, shape-shifting. I know it's something you don't want to accept, that there are people walking among us that could shape-shift into other things. It's not something I really want to accept either, to be honest, but I do think that the biblical evidence and the first-hand testimonies out there point to it being a real thing. And then finally, invisibility. Let's go to 2 Kings 6:17. This is just one example of a phenomenon that we see all throughout the scriptures in different places here and there. 6:17. Another example would be Balaam when he's riding on, I think it was a donkey, and his eyes are open and he sees this angel with a sword blocking the way. But anyway, 2 Kings 6:17. Here we go. Okay, let's go back to 6:15. So this is Elisha, and he's in this place with his servant, and there's this military force that's trying to, I guess, seize them and probably kill them. I don't remember the exact context, but you can look at this for yourself. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? So they're seeing that there's all these chariots and horsemen. You're not going to outrun that. These are the best warriors that that these guys could muster to come against. I forget who it was who was actually. Let's go back. I forget who it was that was actually trying to seize Elisha at this point in time. Anyway, let's. All right, here we are. Sorry about that. And he answered, this is Elisha answering, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. So these this angelic army was able to, or army of spiritual beings that is fighting for the Lord, is able to shroud and conceal itself from view. Invisibility is one of the capabilities of spiritual beings. And this is something, again, that all throughout these accounts of Sasquatch and dogmen and so forth, sometimes they will they will go invisible if they feel threatened. And then there's accounts too of these things going invisible sometimes, but they aren't able to completely go fully invisible, and so people can still see the outlines or a translucent shadow of them where they are. And that happens as well. And I've encountered this in probably at least 6 or 8 different first-hand accounts that I've heard myself at this point. People talking about these things having some kind of optical camouflage or invisibility capability. There's other things too mentioned in some of these accounts that I wasn't necessarily able to substantiate from the scriptures. Psionic vampires that can feed on life force or feed on fear energy. What's really interesting about this is that there's disclosure of this stuff in the entertainment world. There's literally a movie called Life Force where a space expedition brings back these human form psionic vampire aliens back to Earth. They look like humans, but they're not, and they feed on people's life force. It's not even a decent movie, so I'm not really going to recommend that you go see it, but it's fascinating that the concept is there if you read a synopsis of it or whatever. And then, think about movies like Monsters Incorporated. What are they doing? They are going around using portals to get into children's bedrooms, and they're feeding on the terror of children. Well, the more you start studying the hidden world and things going on behind the scenes, is that actually what's happening with these demonic entities? Are they feeding on the energy and fear of people? Are they harvesting our fear? And, well, there are people who claim to be a part of this world who say, yes, this is a very real thing. And I'm going to show you one of my sources that is kind of controversial, and I'll give you some of my thoughts on it as we go through. But I really just want to make sure you guys understand this stuff. I'm trying to prepare you for things to come. And you know what? If I'm crazy and completely wrong about all this, I will be the happiest man in the world. I grew up hiking and going camping with my family and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't want to believe that out in the remote regions of the woods that there are areas the government set aside for these entities. But there's a lot of things I don't want to believe. But the more I look into it, the more it seems to be the reality of what's going on. So Tennessee is an interesting place. Tennessee actually has like 20% of the nation's caves. Not the nation's caves. So that's crazy. Over 10,000 caves and caverns. And this one fellow, well, and then Kentucky's up there as well. Tons of caves and caverns, and there's things living in these underworld places that apparently come out to the surface occasionally, and they're coming back and forth between the underground world and the surface world. We see in Revelation that eventually the key to the bottomless pit's going to be opened, and some of these things are going to start coming out. We could maybe wrangle a bit about what exactly that means. Are these things that are physically under the earth, or are these things in another dimension, and that dimension's going to be unlocked? Is it both? I think there could be some truth to both elements of that. I'm just going to share something here. So this fellow, Nathan Reynolds, this interview is hugely, I'm gonna warn you, you're not gonna like it. You're not gonna like it at all. But he claims to be part of a Luciferian family or an Illuminati family, the Reynoldses. And he was basically raised as a child sex slave, and then later a child soldier, doing dark things in the hidden world for these really wicked people. But in his family, there was this understanding that they were Nephilim descendants, that they had blood from the Nephilim. And according to him, having a Nephilim bloodline makes you a better and more efficient vessel for demonic entities to use and possess. And in this testimony, he says that it is absolutely true that there are people who are capable of shifting into other forms. And he mentions that there's two sides of this coin. There's the occult side, and he said the Hopi and the Navajo are two traditions, I guess, that are extremely good at this stuff. Um, at shapeshifting. I guess that's the skinwalker side of things, which I've never really looked at in much detail, but it seems it just fits with all this stuff. Skinwalkers being like shamans or witches that are able to shapeshift. Um, and according to him, the shapeshifting aspect is sometimes tied to demonic entities that are able to facilitate those shifts. Like you have someone who is open to these demonic powers, and they have a Nephilim bloodline, and they're just sort of like the ideal clay that these demonic entities can then use and manipulate. And he said there's two sides of this, that the occult world is entangled with the U.S. government world, especially the intelligence services and different teams within the Department of Defense. And they're constantly doing their evil work throughout the world. And it's a really dark video, but this fellow became a born-again Christian, got out of that world, and the things that he's saying are fascinating. And they actually corroborate a source that I've had for years, which is Springmeyer's Bloodlines of the Illuminati. And so this is a very controversial book. Basically, this guy covers so much of American history. He names names, he names places, and he's showing the occult side of all this and how it plays into American history. And what's fascinating about this particular work, so after I watched some of Nathan Reynolds' interviews and things like that, I ran his name through the bloodlines of the Illuminati, his family name. So let's go ahead and just do that real quick, and I'm going to show you something that I found, which is Reynolds. So the Reynolds family is not, they're not one of the 13 ruling bloodlines of the Illuminati, but they are a very powerful part of the occult underworld. And as Nathan Reynolds mentions in his interviews, his family has kind of two arms, and it looks like the eastern arm over on the East Coast is more the financial side of it, and then he was part of the side of the family that operated more in Arizona, Colorado, out west, where these high places are, where the families are actually interacting with demonic entities and making contracts with them and so forth. You got to understand, Colorado is a very satanic place. A lot of witchcraft covens out there, a lot of cult groups, a lot of secret societies, and it is the headquarters of the New World Order. You can look into those conspiracy theories around like Denver and the international airport there and stuff like that. But Springmeyer's conclusion, the Reynolds, they're not one of the primary 13 bloodlines. They're not one of the ruling families, but they are a very prominent and influential Illuminati family. Now, Reynolds himself doesn't like, Nate Reynolds, doesn't like the term Illuminati, and I understand that. It can be a misleading term. He prefers to call his family Luciferians, alright? But Luciferian and Illuminati, they are really kind of the same thing. They both have that connotation of illumination, or light bringer, or enlightened ones. That's the meaning of Illuminati, and that's the meaning of Lucifer, shining bright or shining one, enlightened one. And in the secret societies and covens and so forth, Lucifer is seen, for example, within Freemasonry, as a Promethean figure. Prometheus was a demigod who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. That's how these organizations see Lucifer. They see him as a good guy. They see him as an intermediary between humanity and higher angelic powers. And yeah, this stuff is all very satanic, very Luciferian. And but the testimony of Nathan Reynolds is real interesting, and you should definitely check that out if you want to see the dark underbelly of the world we live in. It's disturbing stuff, though. I mean, we're talking about families that practice blood magic, sex magic, human sacrifice, and just all manner of vile and disgusting things. And most normal people are not prepared for this stuff, so I'm just going to say, be careful. If you hit a point where this stuff's getting too dark and depressing for you, just unplug and decompress. It may not be for you at this present time, and that's fine. It takes time to acclimatized to some of these truths because we're so brainwashed and so spiritually dead with our discernment being dulled, and that's by intention. The world does that to us by intention. So I am of the conclusion that Sasquatch and dogmen, werewolves, and other animal shifters, that these are Nephilim descendants and that they have characteristics and capabilities of the Nephilim, including all of these right here. And they may have these capabilities in different proportion, like not all individuals may have the ability to do all these things. There might be some that can, do the infrasound, do the invisibility, but they don't have the ability to shapeshift for whatever reason. They're locked into a beast form, but they still have some of these other capabilities, physical strength and so forth. There may be some that can do all this stuff. So Reynolds mentions, this fellow, Nathan Reynolds, that after about 5 generations, stuff starts to dilute in terms of the capabilities that people have. Now he mentions something else that's really interesting, and I never thought about it before, but I do believe that this is correct. He mentions that Nephilim being created is an ongoing process. So according to the book of Enoch, about 200 watchers, that's a class of spiritual being, 200 watchers mingled with the daughters of men in Genesis 6, and it just occurs to me too, Genesis 6, Revelation 6. So Genesis 6 is the lead up to the flood, and we just see violence proliferating everywhere, Nephilim multiplying and dominating over humanity, and it's just a really terrible time, and the wickedness of man is great in the earth. And then what's Revelation 6? Well, it is the time of the horsemen of the apocalypse. The horsemen are the lead up to the end times. We're not to the tribulation yet, but we're in the lead up to the tribulation. And those seals have to be unsealed before we get to the tribulation. That's Revelation 6. And during this time, a quarter of humanity is going to die, and it's a time of great wickedness on earth, great turmoil, violence, plague, famine, warfare, and people being killed by beasts of the earth. It's like what the New Testament says, that things are going to get back to the days of Noah before the end comes. And it just occurred to me that Genesis 6 and Revelation 6, they're talking about the same thing, except this is before the flood, whereas Revelation 6 is before the tribulation. That's wild. That's some interesting stuff right there. But this process is ongoing, according to Nathan Reynolds. He says within the families, within the Luciferian families, they give their daughters over to these Nephilim entities. And so high places, we see all throughout the Old Testament that there are these high places where evil worship practices were going on in the Old Testament. That has never stopped either. High places are quite literally high places, and that's why out west in the mountains of Arizona, Colorado, there are these high places where basically what's happening is certain times of the year, the solstices and so forth, Nephilim are coming down and residing on these high places, and so these Luciferian families go up there, they commune with the Nephilim, and they make deals with them. And they're actually interacting with these beings in these places, and sometimes trying to seduce them to join the satanic powers. Now, there are demonic entities in the earth as well that have fallen already. So this Nephilim process is ongoing, and there's a couple different sides to it as well. There's the spiritual side, not only spiritual beings still creating hybrids with human women, and then those things having, being maybe interbred, crossbred, and whatnot, and having descendants. So there's that side of it. But then there is the technological side where, according to Nathan Reynolds, some elements of this can be reproduced technologically with drugs, with transhumanism, and technology. Probably cloning, selective breeding, and other things as well. And Nathan's not the only one who's talked about this. There are other sources that say, yes, the U.S. government is breeding dogmen for military purposes, that they are tagged and tracked at all times, including conditioning monitoring, so they know whether these things are alive or dead at any given time. and that they're used in training operations at places as well. Fort Campbell is very near the LBL, the Land Between the Lakes, and there are soldiers who have had encounters with these things during training operations. So just kind of a lot of stuff going on here in this hidden world that is all around us that we're just kept um, uh, oblivious to. I want to show you something here. This is relating to Noah. Okay, so this is Genesis 6:9. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. Um, so I always grew up in churches that did not teach the Nephilim theory. They didn't teach anything about fallen angels mingling with the daughters of men. It wasn't here until now. I'd heard of it, and I was kind of on the fence about it for a while, and then I moved to the South, and a lot of churches down here do teach it here in the South. And it got me looking into it in more detail, and I really got on board with it because it's something that the scriptures clearly teach, and there are um, things that relate to this all throughout the scriptures. We're told in the New Testament that there are angels who left their first estate. What was that first estate? The spiritual realm. They left it in order to meddle in the physical realm, which was not something that they were supposed to do, but they did. And so some of those angels were specifically judged for that, and they're kept in chains until a day of judgment. But this is interesting. I was always just taught that this passage meant that the earth was really wicked before the flood, and that's why God destroyed it. Well, people have always been really wicked. There's something else going on here, and it's encapsulated here. Noah was a just man, so he was righteous, and he was perfect in his generations. What's going on there? He was genetically pure. He didn't have these corrupt Nephilim genes in his system. And so I do believe that that the flood wiped these things out, but they came back somehow. And there's a couple different thoughts on this. I have heard some people say that one of the sons of Noah had a wife who had some of these genes, but to me it makes more sense what this fellow's saying, that the process of Nephilim being created is ongoing. And there's a technological side where they're being created on that side, and then there's the spiritual side where it is actually fallen angels doing their thing. However that works, I don't really know with human women. And that just makes a lot of sense to me. People are encountering these things more and more. They're coming back somehow or other. And there's an element here too where they may be being created when people open themselves up to the occult and let these things into their lives and give themselves over to these things. We're already being genetically modified through the vaccines, through vaccines in cruciferous vegetables. So that's things like lettuce and tomatoes. Yeah, we know for a fact that they're manipulating the food supply. There are things in pork, and now there's lab-grown chicken that's being pushed out through various fast food outlets and stuff like that. And these things are designed to, at this point, I think at one point Nathan said something to the effect of none of us are natural humans anymore. I mean, there's just stuff in the, and this is why he and his wife are, I think they're kind of like into organic farming, trying to raise their own food and raise their kids to be more, to have a more basic lifestyle and be able to, provide food for themselves and stuff like that. And I think that's something that we all should look into. Because if the grocery stores are shut down, where are you going to get your food? How are you going to feed your family? But his view is they want they want their food to be pure and not contaminated. And unfortunately, the world system is corrupting and contaminating the food supply and the water and all this other stuff. And they're doing it for purposes of transhumanism. They are modifying our bodies without our consent. Or I guess in a sense we consent by partaking. And yeah, it's not good. And why are they doing that? Probably to make us better, more efficient vessels for demonic entities. This is some dark stuff, admittedly. This is really dark stuff. I don't want to believe this stuff, but the scriptures make this clear. There are extra biblical works that they're not scripture, but they're generally reliable, like the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jasher. And some of these extra biblical sources talk about this stuff. And then we have eyewitness testimony of people who have been part of these systems, part of the of what's going on the governmental side, part of what's going on the occult side, where they've had encounters with these things. All right, well, I think, where are we at? About the hour mark. I think what we're going to do now, I've pretty much talked about most of what I want to talk about. I'm going to talk about my last source that I have. Some people are going to think that this, well, it is, all of this stuff is questionable in a sense that it's hard to verify. So I'm just going to go through this and give my thoughts. This is someone who claims to be a wolf shifter. And here's what they have to say. And I'll talk about this as we go through. Do actual shape-shifting werewolves exist? I would like to talk. I have many questions. Yes, we are known as wolf shifters. Werewolf is a term we use within our community, and it is considered offensive when used by any others but others like us. We don't advertise much to humans, and we are very, very rare in the modern day. We are born just like you. Nothing is made by drinking blood, spells, or videos online. Because there's a ton of people that are interested in becoming a werewolf due to the fantasy side of it. But this guy's adamant over and over that you're either born that way or you're not. It's genetic. It's not something you can just do. Although that might not be entirely true. As I mentioned, there is sort of a pharmakeia side to this, where some of these things can be imitated technologically. But anyway, we blend with most humans very well, except for being physically superior. Alphas are elected by pack mates. There's no secret hierarchy to us or vampires. Now, to be clear, he consistently says that vampires are generally, in his view, deluded people who just think that they're getting power from drinking blood. And we'll see that as we go through this. Vampires don't vibe with the sun or have any abilities or lifespan different from any other humans. Being a hybrid, I feed off of the willing, and it's by psi energy only. Now that's really interesting. Being a hybrid, what does that mean? A hybrid with what? Well, he's partially human. What's he a hybrid with? He doesn't really necessarily talk about that. But he feeds off of the willing, and it's by psi energy only. Some people have, as I mentioned, described their encounters with these things as if these things are feeding off their fear. No sane being drinks blood or lives forever. That's pure Hollywood fantasy about crazy, powerful, superpowered vampires draining human plasma unless they're just mental. Anyone who claims otherwise is trolling or plain nuts. Now, to be clear on this, though, there is the whole adrenochrome, young blood transfusions side of things. So I don't think that this guy has a fully clear picture on all this stuff. I do think, well, I don't think there are vampires. I'm at the point right now where I don't think there are vampires in a physical sense that they're a different type of entity. But I do believe that there are people who use blood and have technologies for using blood that they can derive benefits from, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's keep going. True wolves are far more impressive in every way, though, but both species are very much mortals. Vampires are just pale humans who have a deficiency of minerals, but supplements work just fine. Some claim direct sunlight is internally irritating and we're unaffected by the moon as far as shifting. Those of us who can actually physically shift are so rare that you may never meet or see one. And this goes along with what Reynolds was saying, that the bloodlines dilute pretty quickly, like within 5 generations, and some of the more powerful abilities of these Nephilim offspring are sort of lost over time. We do possess a high degree of aptitude for energy work and spells. He's talking about magic or other mentalistic powers that aren't generally accepted to exist, but which definitely do if you start digging into this stuff. And magic is very real because of the power that's being tapped into, at least by some of these mystery schools and secret societies is demonic power. And demons are very real. We're all mortal humans in almost every way that counts. It's purely genetic by birth. Everything else is pure fiction in books, TV, movies, and old world superstitions. Let's continue on. Do vampires and werewolves exist? Magic is just science we don't understand yet, Arthur C. Clarke, so there's more oddities out there than most people could imagine, and there's a literal ton of bad information out there. Yeah, very true. We're currently not recruiting humans in any capacity. The only way to join us is to be born, as we all were. It's much rarer than all these humans who are obvious role players. There's a lot of people pretending to be vampires or werewolves online just for the kicks, and especially because of all these very popular franchises in the fictional world concerning these things. However, we can tell easily, we talk, we communicate often, and some really see humans masquerading as a glittery Edward Cullen or anything else as a personal offense. So I'm not personally into Twilight. I've never seen any of those, but I think some of this stuff is a reference to that. I know so many amazing humans that are dear friends of ours also. It's not what, but who we are. Much respect to everyone on here. Whatever you are, have a blast. Good evening. Alright, so one thing I will say is that my biggest problem with the shape-shifting aspect of this was that there's a scientific conservation of mass problem. Like, how do you have a 200-pound dude shape-shifting into a 600-pound werewolf? And scientifically speaking, there's still incredible problems with this, but I'm encountering enough people who say that this is real, the real deal, and I find them trustworthy enough to accept that this might, we've talked about the Nephilim capability. I do think that this is a reality. I don't like it. I don't understand it. Anyway, let's continue. Are werewolves and shifting into wolves scientifically possible in the way that real shifters describe them to be as gene and evolutionary trait? Yes, wolf shifters are actually real, just not in the lame, tweeny media sense known today from children's shows, books, and movies. We're quite rare at this point, 2022. Now that's his experience. I don't know where he lives. I believe he's more on the eastern side of things because he talks about the Appalachians a bit. But anyway, let's keep going. Many people claiming to be werewolves are mentally ill and unstable. The actual amount of us who are born with the gene are about 1 in a million, often less. We're much stronger and move quicker than modern humans, but not by a ludicrous amount. We're more dexterous, resistant to injury and sickness, and have a much higher aptitude for magic and energy work. Years of interbreeding with humans for centuries has watered down the ancient bloodlines in the modern day. In the Appalachian Mountains, the remote nature reserves are home to the strongest of our kind in the modern world. Pack structure is an alpha as leader or mentor, with usually one second or lieutenant. Our bodies are made to reconfigure themselves in the form of our wolf. This is far beyond some lame fictional TV drama for young girls. This is absolute life. We're born, not made. The only way to become anything besides human is to be born one. Of 50,000 people online claiming to be one of us, only 1 or 2 really is. The rest are role players or fantasy writers. It's quite sad. Even real vampires are just humans with a medical deficiency that they believe drinking blood can replenish. No superpowers or immortality, just a pale human with a slight aversion to sunlight. Average human lifespan and no more dead than you are reading this. There's not a beat, YouTube, tone, spell, or turning that can change who you are. Be happy with being a human, as 96% of you are. Anyways, we're born what we are, and all you humans have your own little contributions too. Let's carry on. What do you call a half-human, half-demon? In reality, a myth, although I don't necessarily agree with him on this. So he talks about being a hybrid in the bloodlines, but he doesn't really talk about the origin of that, and I think from a biblical perspective, we understand that that's exactly what's going on here. He himself, if he is truly a wolf shifter, he is a half-human, half-demon. And we see in all these ancient mythologies as well, the Greeks and others, that the concept of demi-humans mingling with human beings it's all throughout. It's in the Greek mythology, all these other mythologies as well. Anyway, There are a lot of miscategorized creatures out there lumped into the category of demons. Yeah, I agree with that. In the classic sense, demons, as most think of them, were the fallen angels who left heaven with Lucifer and were demonized in hell. Humans cannot become angels or demons in death or otherwise. That is correct. We, human beings, were not going to become angels. We're not going to become demons. They can become a vengeful spirit, but that's not a regular occurrence either. I don't know about that. I just have no frame of reference for that whatsoever. I don't know. But we cannot become angels or demons. The Bible teaches that we're going to be in a glorified form like Jesus Christ, if we know Jesus. And that the saints are going to judge angels. See, the angels have a different role than humans do. The Bible says, let me actually look this up, angel and minister. So the angels are ministers. What does that mean? It means they're servants. This is annoying. All right. Here we go. And of the angels, he saith, who maketh his angels spirits and his ministers a flame of fire. So, what's a minister? Well, it is a servant. And the angels, that is their purpose. They serve. They serve God. They serve humanity, too, in a variety of ways. As messengers, ministering to the prophets, for example, and guardian angels. I believe that a biblical case can be made for the reality of guardian angels, but their purpose was not to rule or have dominion. Humanity's purpose was to rule and have dominion over the physical, material realm, and so we are different from the angels. There's one way to become something like a wolf shifter, and it's genetic by birth, not like the movies. Wolf shifters can overpower most humans with ease in either form, but we don't advertise much more than that publicly. Let's see. This person says, best to leave a lot of the real supernatural to those who make a living from it and enjoy every second of your life instead of conspiracy theories, which are predominantly untrue. And again, like I said, he consistently does not believe that vampires are real. But he does mention, I think at one point, the possibility of energy vampires. But anyway. The moon has zero effect on humans or shifters. That's not entirely true. There is something to the term lunatic. There are people who are affected by the moon. I have periods where I'll have like 3 or 4 days of insomnia when the moon is full, quite often. And it does affect my mental state. Why that is, I don't know. But the gist of what he's saying is that the moon doesn't force people to transform or anything like that. Someone asks if lycanthropy is a magical virus, can it exchange RNA and create hybrids? My advice to humans is to stay clear. There's a good reason for this, that these entities are quite physically strong and they do see people as a valid food source. They do hunt us when they're hungry and they do eat us, and that's documented. The only way to become one is birthright. Lunar effect is nil. It's fight or flight. I don't know exactly what this means. Whether there's like a stress scenario will put them into this mode, or what the deal is. Yeah, how should one handle a person who transforms into a werewolf or other type of beasts? Forget you heard it. It says here, you can't be bitten and survive, but were born like you were. Humans can't turn into anything but delusional. Sorry, there's no blood into anything. A lot of people are interested in trying to become these things, and so they're asking him questions to this effect. So by the way, the place where I found this guy's account had been unused for a couple years. I'm not going to name the website where I found this stuff. I'm not going to name this user. I just find this stuff interesting for a number of reasons. It just fits with other things that I've seen. Anyway, what's the relationship between light and werewolves, vampires, and ghosts? Vampires don't exist. We don't like strangers assuming anything about us. He's claiming to be the werewolf, and ghosts are usually dead humans. I disagree with that part. I believe a lot of poltergeist activity and hauntings are actually demonic entities doing those things for purposes of deception. And I do believe that demonic entities are attracted to places where human sacrifice or a lot of bloodshed took place in the past. Holy site, or well, sacred religious sites from the past and stuff like that. Jekyll Island is actually a really good example of that, and you should look that up. That's interesting stuff. What's the best way of defeating an energy vampire? Psychic protection and armor. He actually seems to acknowledge that there are types of beings that are energy vampires that can feed on the energy or life force of other beings. And as he mentioned earlier, remember, they feed on the willing, like other hybrids. He doesn't really elaborate what the other non-human side of things is. How can you become a werewolf without getting bitten or being born one? You can't. Is it possible to become one? No, we're born only and rarer than you know. Theoretically, what would be the PSI of a werewolf bite? This is some interesting stuff. Actually, the bite force of the average Appalachian Alpha, 3 known in the USA, is about 12,000 PSI, based on a measurement taken from my father in the early 90s, under his host in the Smokies. A guardian werewolf like myself, once a generation, can actually reach up to 22,000. These numbers aren't too incredible. They're kind of on par with like maybe an orca bite. And these are, well, anyway, PSI in direwolf form when roused to battle. We are born, in other words, it's a genetic thing, never bitten, so you can't become a werewolf by getting bitten by a werewolf. And he's said that over and over at this point. Immune to many things that plague most average humans. Live about a century or so, depending on a myriad of factors. Vampires, as seen in movies, books, and TV, don't exist at this current time. Nothing is immortal, and that's important to mention. These things can be killed, and they don't require silver weapons to kill them. Joe Barger, Christian truck driver, you can find his first-hand testimony online, and I linked to it in my other video, Werewolves Are Real. Well, evil beasts of the end times, werewolves are real. I did show off Joe Barger's testimony in that a little bit. In his case, he had a pistol, truck driver. This thing was running alongside his truck, and he shot it in the head and killed it. Lie detection, heightened senses, innate ability to perform many metaphysical abilities most can never truly understand. That's the Nephilim side of things. Immune to curses, spells, and psychic attacks. I mean, that is really not true, according to Nathan Reynolds. According to him, these Nephilim descendants are more efficient vessels for demonic possession. And he's... I don't remember if it was him specifically who said this or someone else, that if you encounter one of these things, it's very likely that there's a demonic presence there as well. And by the way, this is incredibly interesting because it parallels J.R.R. Tolkien and some stuff that he wrote about in his Lord of the Rings world. There's a lot more to Lord of the Rings than first meets the eye. There's a reason why a single all-seeing eye is used as the symbol for Lord Sauron, the evil, the bad guy in Lord of the Rings. There's a reason why there are parallels to the Nephilim accounts in Lord of the Rings. And I don't think it's part of the main Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. But in Tolkien's greater lore, he does write about werewolves. And werewolves are interesting because some of them are animal and they're bred, but then some of them are demonic entities, or they're animal with a demon riding them, or basically indwelling them. So that's really interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff. I don't know where Tolkien was getting all of his inspiration from, but the man was very insightful, and the Lord of the Rings is allegorical. There's a lot of spiritual truths encapsulated in it, even though it's fiction. The sad truth is most of you will not ever know you are interacting with one of our rare kind, so no need to worry. No one is close to stupid enough to hunt us. That's actually not true anymore. There are people who, well, I'm not going to talk about that. But anyway, truth is, without us, humans would never have made it close to civilization. Now that's really interesting, because that's another aspect of the concepts of these watchers giving knowledge to humanity that was forbidden knowledge that we were never intended to have, forbidden technology. I personally just call this demon tech. And if you know anything about some of the stuff going on at CERN, and there's a lot of dark science that is really demonic technology. It's not stuff we were ever meant to have. It's not stuff ever meant that we were ever meant to mess with. And some of these scientists are tinkering around with the spiritual realm and with demonic entities, and that's just really not good. Pharmakeia and the pharmaceutical industry, yeah, just a lot of stuff there. Anyway, I hope you found this video to be interesting. I've at least thrown out a whole bunch of breadcrumbs for you, and if this is something that you're interested in and feel like, for whatever reason, you need to delve into in more detail for yourself, I think I've given you a bunch of different things that you can continue to explore. And if you have questions, as always, feel free to put those down into the comments. Have a great week, and I'll see you guys next time.